This is just a summary video of Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. So what we've seen is using trigonometry to solve triangles. In Chapter 7 we focused on the ratios for right angle triangles specifically. So you could use your SOHCAHTOA if you want to solve a right angle triangle along with a theorem. Then in Chapter 8 we went on to see, well, triangles that were oblique with a focus on acute, meaning less than 90 degrees. And so when we had those oblique triangles or acute triangles, we had to use either our sine rule or our cosine rule, depending on what information you're given about the triangle. So for the sine rule, there's two variations of the formula. You could write down the sides on top and the sine of the angles at the bottom if you're looking for sides, and then the sine of the angles on top and side lengths at the bottom if you're looking for angles. And of course you have to do your inverse sine if you want to find the angle at the end. You just have to be consistent with what you're choosing. And then when you want to find the angle and when you're using your sine or your cos or your tan or whatever you're using, you need to make sure your calculator is always in degrees and that was consistent throughout. For your cosine rule, this is your formula if you want to find sides, and you can rearrange it to find angles. Don't forget to do your inverse cos at the end to find the angle, because otherwise you just find cos of the angle. And there's different variations of these formulas. You can change it based on the side you're looking at. So you could put B here or C here, and that changes what's in the formula here. So if you use this website as a good review tool, it will be helpful to help you understand the different concepts that we've seen so far. There's an explanation of the sine rule provided, along with some examples and walkthroughs. Then there's some practice problems you can do where you can try the problem out and then you can verify your work to see that you're on the right path. There's the same thing for the cosine rule as well. So you can see that you're on the right path. Try the workout, and you can click on the Show Me to assess your own work, to do some self-assessment. So the biggest part is combining all these different tools together. And so this is a great flowchart because it goes over your thought process you should be using when you're trying to solve problems. So you first want to ask yourself, is a triangle that I'm dealing with a right angle triangle? If it's not a right angle triangle, or if it is a right angle triangle, so if you say yes to that, then you want to decide what your next step is. You're going to ask yourself, well, it is a right angle triangle. Does the question involve angles? If the question involves angles, well, then you're going to use your ratios. If it doesn't involve angles, then you're just going to use your theorem to find what the side is. Sometimes you might use both. You might need to find sides and angles. But the idea is that if it's a right triangle, you go this way to use the trig ratios if needed. Is the triangle right angled? So let's say you said no to that. Well, now you know you're either going to use the sine rule or the cosine rule. So for example, if you know a side and its opposite angle, then you can go and use the sine rule. If you don't know that, maybe you know two sides and a contained angle, you might use the cosine rule. Or you know all three sides and no angles, then you might use the cosine rule. So this flowchart just really helps you to determine what you're going to be using, when you're going to be using it. So do practice it. I would recommend transcribing this flowchart into your notes along with some examples that you might add to the flowchart as well. And then you can see some more practice problems using this flowchart here. So for example, is the triangle a right angle triangle? So it's not. So here we do not have a right angle triangle, so we're going this way. What do we know? Well, we know two sides, and we know an angle, and we know an angle that's opposite to that side. So that means that we can use the sine rule. So we just use the flowchart to figure out that we're going to use the sine rule to try to figure out maybe angle B over here. Is it a right angle triangle? Yes, it is. Does the question involve angles? It does. So we have angles there. So since there's angles, then we're going to use a trig ratio. If I want to find side y, you might say, well, why couldn't I use my theorem? Well, you could, but you're missing this side here to do that. So you're going to have to use angles to find this side here using your trig ratios. Same idea here. So here we have a triangle. It's a right angle triangle, so we're going this way. There's no angles given other than the 90 degrees, and we're looking for this side here. So we have two sides already. We don't really need to use our trig ratios. If you want to solve the triangle completely, then you would have to use the trig ratios. So remember, when I say solve a triangle, it means find everything about that triangle, sides and angles and all. And then Here you can see that you do not have a right angle triangle, so you're going this way. You'll notice that you have 3 sides but no angles. So do you know a side and its opposite angle? Well, no, and so we're going to be using the cosine rule in that case. Then you can do these practice problems with the Show Me button that you can click on to assess your own work to see if you're on the right path. And if you're not, if you don't get it right, go back and retry it. Go back and take a look at the videos. Go back and take a look at the flow chart and at the examples that were done, because it's that struggling that will really help you to grasp the concept of trigonometry. And then there's a few more exercises that you can do here, putting in the values that are missing. So this is a great website to really go over the concept. Sometimes you might have mixed triangles where you have 2 triangles within a bigger one, and there's a right angle triangle there too. So try those problems, and then you can try out your word problems as well. So go back and practice those word problems, practice sketching triangles, and that should ensure that you're sufficiently prepared for this unit, and for just interpreting questions in future units as well. A good sketch is really the great first step to any math problem that you're doing, especially when it comes to real world ones.